Formula 1 in the 2020s is a far cry away from what we now know as the good old days. The good old days of real cars, real engines, and everything else that has become tinged with nostalgia. In the 90s, it was V10s or even V8s or V12s, because that's what the rules allowed back in that time. V8s were lighter and more fuel efficient while being cheaper, while V12s were heavier, thirstier, and had a decent amount of grunt. V10s, meanwhile, were a nice middle ground offering the best of both worlds, and because of this, by the time 1998 rolled round, every single car was running a V10, with 1997 being the last time until 2006 that V10s and V8s shared the grid, with the last of the V12s disappearing at the end of 1995. 1995 is 30 years ago, but good luck convincing me otherwise. And at the same time, there was the tobacco sponsorship. Most of the teams on the grid during the 1995 season, with maybe the exceptions of Sauber, Simtek and Pacific, had a connection somewhere with a tobacco company. Whether that was having the logos front and centre with the corporate colours making up the livery, like in the case of Benetton, Williams, McLaren or Ligier, or they had them at a lesser level, like the smaller logos seen at Jordan, 40 or wherever, because there were so many drivers who came through the system who had backing from Marlboro, or Mild 7 in the case of someone like Ukyo Katayama. Now though, those days have gone. Around the midpoint of the first decade of the 2000s, governments around the world were latching on to the whole smoking is bad thing, and as a result tobacco advertising became less and less in motorsport as a whole, not just in Formula 1. In Britain and France, those logos had been banned for a long time, with Britain banning tobacco advertising as early as 1963. In 2003, the Belgian Grand Prix was cancelled over arguments as to whether or not the F1 teams could have the logos on the cars, and in 2008, the only races allowing the full Marlboro branding on the Ferraris were Monaco, China and Bahrain. The death knell for tobacco advertisements on cars came around the 2005-2006 season, as the European Union started signing legislation that banned these things outright, so you saw fewer and fewer tobacco logos at more and more races, and this kind of affected how the teams were going to raise the funds with which to go racing. Now it seems that Formula 1 has latched onto the blockchain and crypto craze, with crypto sponsors now appearing on Formula 1 cars, or appearing and disappearing in the case of FTX on the Mercedes cars a few years ago. And I've mentioned several times in previous videos that I'm surprised that Formula 1 didn't go down the gambling and betting route, since these betting sites and online casinos have a similar bottomless supply of cash. But since the betting companies are so entrenched in the world of football, darts, horse racing, snooker and those kinds of sports, they haven't really made their way over. As well as this, there is, a bit like with tobacco, a bit of a morality thing with the whole gambling stuff, seeing as in the UK, the advertising of gambling is pretty much weaponised, and there is a consciousness around gambling addiction that's been coming out in the last couple of years. But while there were so many teams in the late 90s sponsored by tobacco companies, in 1999 a team joined the grid that was a tobacco company. That team was British American Racing. I've covered the disaster class that was the 1999 BAR season in full, so there's going to be a bit of overlap here with that video, and there will be overlap with another video that I did involving the team that we'll get to later on. So I'll try and get a recap in without taking up too much time, because I have to balance everything between assuming every viewer is new without making long-time viewers go, I've seen this one before. But the BAR team's history actually starts in the 1960s, as it was once Matra, then Tyrrell. And funnily enough, the downfall of Tyrrell is a story I've also done. Ken's team of plucky underdogs was kind of the last of the garagistas, while we refer to Eddie Jordan as the last of the privateers. Ken was running that team in 1996 as he had done in 1968, on an absolute shoestring, and it was clear that the days of being able to run a team for pennies wasn't going to work for much longer with the way the budgets were escalating. But that said, Ken had managed to survive where so many had come and gone, such as the likes of 40 who collapsed mid-1996. There was also Simtek and Pacific through the 1994 and 1995 seasons, and even some of the bigger and more successful names like Brabham and Lotus also disappeared from Formula 1. Eddie Jordan had managed to sign big money deals with Benson and Hedges and get engine deals with Peugeot and later Mugen, while Ken had to rely on pay drivers for survival and his cars looked bare as he scraped together sponsorship. But in the latter part of 1997, Ken finally swallowed his pride and sold the team, selling it to a guy called Craig Pollock, who had managed to convince British American Tobacco to put the money up so that they could buy that Tyrrell team. British American Tobacco, or BAT, had been involved in Formula 1 and other motorsports for several years. Brands associated with BAT in one way or another include John Player Gold Leaf, Benson and Hedges, Lucky Strike, 555, Rothmans, Winfield and Cool. Now, there's going to be some people going, But that brand is owned by this company and that brand's owned by that company. And they probably are. But BAT sells John Player and Gold Leaf in Bangladesh. Benson's is produced by BAT and Philip Morris. But it seems that the tobacco industry is just as incestuous as the motorsport industry is. And actually, part of the reason why Williams dumped the tobacco sponsorship at the end of 1999 was because BAT bought the Rothmans brand during 1999, and Rothmans had the Winfield brand under its, I don't know, umbrella, if you want to call it that. Basically, BAT wasn't going to put the logos of their products on a competitor's car. But BAT now had a team, British American Racing, or just simply BAR. BAR used Reynard to build the chassis for the team, outsourcing much like Haas does today with Dallara, and Adrian Reynard had made the bold claim that the team would win a race in the 1999 season, its debut season. But as you might have seen in my video called The Worst Debut Season in History, that would not be the case. BAR had also upset the FIA by unveiling their cars in different liveries. Jacques Villeneuve's was in white and red, while Ricardo Zonta's was in blue, because BAT was trying to advertise its two main products, Lucky Strike and 555, at the same time. But the FIA said no. So Pollock went to the International Chamber of Commerce and also filed a complaint with the European Commission. But when the FIA threatened BAR with bans and fines, they relented and went with the now infamous, or iconic, whichever way you want to look at it, Zip livery that had 555 on one side and Lucky Strike on the other. BAR was also using the slogan Tradition of Excellence, and this was seen as being utterly hilarious at the time, because BAR had no history other than the history of Matra and Tyrrell who came before them, and even then it wouldn't be BAR's history, it was Matra's history and Tyrrell's history. BAR didn't win the World Championship in 1969, 1971 and 1973. Matra and Tyrrell did with Jackie Stewart. It's a bit like the Milton Keynes Dons saying that they won the FA Cup in 1988 or whenever it was. That was Wimbledon, not the MK Dons. And that's a complicated story, I'll just leave that there. But between going to the courts, the livery fiasco, and the utterly insane wages they were paying Jacques Villeneuve, it was a case of, you'd better do well, or you're going to look stupid. Guess what? They didn't do well, and they looked silly. JV ended up with 11 straight retirements as the car was chronically unreliable. But Villeneuve was able to show that he was more than just a Williams and Newey merchant by qualifying his car 5th for the race at Imola and running quite high up at the Spanish Grand Prix before retiring. Mika Salo replaced Zonta for 3 races after Ricciardo was injured in Brazil and got the team's best result of the season at Imola by getting 7th. But hilariously, Salo didn't even see the end of that Grand Prix. It was one of those 90% jobs. The team scored no points all season, and they were the only team to do so. This was a team with an almost bottomless supply of money, given that it wasn't just sponsored by a tobacco company, it was a tobacco company, and they also had a world champion who had been lured away from Williams by a lot of money and a lot of promises. And they'd also been talking big before the season started. Long story short, they were an embarrassment. The Supertech engines were iffy, although the car was actually half decent, and both drivers trashed their cars at Spa trying to see who had the biggest bollocks going through Eau Rouge. But during the 1999 season, BAR announced that they would have Honda on board for the following year. It was the first time Honda would be supplying as Honda and bringing full factory support since 1992, when McLaren had their engines. Honda wanted back into F1 as their own team, but Harvey Postlethwaite dying in 1998 put an end to that endeavour. But the issue was, Honda was back, but Jordan had an engine supply deal with Mugen, and that was going to cause some overlap, since Mugen would be leaving once that deal was done. During the 2000 season, Honda supplied engines to both teams. BAR got Honda badged engines with full factory support, and Honda stationed engineers at the BAR factory in Brackley, while Jordan got the same engines but were badged as Mugens to keep things going through that particular season. Honda also promised parity for the two teams. They would both get exactly the same engines, it's just that Mugen would prep the ones for Jordan while Honda worked with BAR, and it was a case of whoever did better, did better. BAR considered the 2001 season to be their first proper season, the Mick Schumacher defender strategy. I like it. But anyway, the new car showed a massive improvement versus the previous year in that it actually finished races. So already, they were onto something. They went from plumb last with 0 points up to 5th in the standings, with a best result of 4th for Villeneuve. But the rest of the F1 world and the media within were still going, so, lads, that win you promised us, where is it? The team scored its first points when Villeneuve and Zonta came home in the top 6. Villeneuve would be 4th again in France, Austria and at Indianapolis, while Zonta would get points on 3 more occasions. The announcement then came that Zonta would be replaced by McLaren test driver Olivier Panis for 2001, but Zonta was becoming disillusioned with the team anyway, telling Autosport that he suffered there. Unfortunately, the article is missing from their archives, so I can't find anything more about that. The thing is, BAR only did marginally better than Jordan in 2000. They scored just 3 points more than Eddie Jordan's band of rock and roll underdogs, which must have made them look a bit silly. Jordan also scored 2 podiums, but were just not consistent enough to get that edge over the BAR cars, with reliability being a pain in EJ's behind. Jordan took home silverware on a couple of occasions, but BAR had them beaten overall. So Honda must have been looking at this and trying to weigh up their options. One team is scoring podiums but then going on runs of not finishing at all, while the other team isn't making the podium but seems to be a little more consistent in finishing in the top 6. As was. But still, both teams kept the Honda engines for 2001, but this time it was Honda badging on both of them, and both teams once again had the exact same engine. BAR also improved their car. The 2000 car was basically the 1999 car with minor updates, but in 2001, Reynard had designed the car to be a little more conservative. At the same time, Reynard added some small aerofoils to the car on the nose and towards the rear to try and deflect air towards the rear axle and produce downforce. Small aerofoils that were apparently quite tricky to work with when building the car. They also put a triangular air intake above the driver's head that would better cool the engine that supposedly had 815 horsepower. But when it came to testing, the car was reliable, but Villeneuve didn't like it. He said that it was slower and harder to control than the previous one. But despite this, Villeneuve managed to take the car to 2 podiums, one at Barcelona and one at Hockenheim, while Panis' best result was 4th. The issue was the scoring was few and far between. Both cars retired a bit too often, and they found themselves outside the points too often. They were finishing inside the top 10, but when you're going around telling the media that you're hoping for 3rd in the standings behind McLaren and Ferrari, and then only scoring 17 points all year, words come back to bite you. Arrogance or not, confidence or not. Another issue was that this new airbox cooled the engine too quickly, so in qualifying they weren't able to get the engine up to the right working temperature fast enough, and they lost a bit of power as a result. Even worse for BAR, come the end of the 2001 season, Jordan had finished above them, despite having less money, on paper worse drivers, and also having none of the technical support that BAR was getting. Although for the 2002 season, Honda did send BAR's test driver Takuma Sato to drive one of the yellow cars. But during the 2002 season, there were questions being asked online of what was going to happen to Jordan after the end of that year. Jordan was going to be at the end of the supply contract with Honda and would have been hoping to impress Honda enough to have the factory support instead of BAR for 2003. But one person by the name of Gary Nassar said that the plan was simple. Honda wanted to buy out a team eventually, and that team would be BAR. Eventually, tobacco money would be gone and the team would just be called Honda. And with Toyota coming into Formula 1, it looked more and more likely. I need to find this guy and see if he's got the numbers for the next Euro Millions jackpot because, well, that's exactly what happened. Hilariously, Jordan beat BAR once again. By the midpoint of the 2002 season, Jordan had 6 points and BAR had yet to score, and this being with a Jordan failure to qualify at the French Grand Prix. It took until the British Grand Prix for BAR to get any points on the board as they came home 4th and 5th, and then another point came at Monza and Indianapolis. Between 2001 and 2002, Craig Pollock had been pushed away from the team, and David Richards had been brought in, but a large slew of staff had left with Pollock, which knocked the team back. Jordan had finished 6th in the 2002 Constructors, and BAR had finished 8th, being outdone by Jaguar. Eddie must have felt quite smug about that. But Gary's prophecy was starting to come true. Honda dumped Jordan and focused solely on BAR. Panis was then let go, and in came Jenson Button. But Villeneuve would be replaced before the end of 2003 after he had a spat with David Richards. Basically, BAR was not going to be paying Villeneuve's wage demands anymore. 2003 would be a better season for BAR as they were back up to 5th in the Constructors. Button outscored his world champion teammate by getting a best result of 4th at Austria, but also scored more points paying finishes in general. It was also the first time since 2000 that BAR had scored 20 or more points in the Constructors. But Villeneuve was replaced with Sato before the end of the 2003 season, and both of those drivers would then be kept into 2004. A switch to Michelin tyres was also on the cards because the team had struggled on the Bridgestones in 2003. Basically, it was a hot summer in Europe that year and the Bridgestone team struggled in general, which is why that season was closer than the 2002 season had been. 2004 would then be the best season that BAR would ever have, because they came out of the gates incredibly quickly. Whatever the team had done to the 006 had worked, as Button scored points at the season opener and then scored a further 6 podiums in the next 7 races, as well as shocking everybody by taking pole for the San Marino Grand Prix. Sato even got a podium of his own at Indianapolis, and the car outperformed everybody's expectations by scoring 10 podiums in total. Up to the start of the 2004 season, they'd only scored 2 podiums. The team was locked in a good battle with Renault for second place in the Constructors, but BAR took it with a massive 119 points. They also had a lightweight carbon fibre gearbox that year, for which they won some engineering awards. In the November of 2004, BAR announced that Honda had purchased 45% of the team. With all the restrictions that were starting to come in regarding tobacco advertising, there were a lot of rumours that BAR might sell the team entirely within the next couple of years, and this Gary guy was starting to be proved more and more right. But there was another question going around beyond would BAR sell the team, and that was, could they continue the form into 2005? No, because they ended up getting themselves into quite a lot of trouble. The full story has been covered before, but the long and short of it is, BAR struggled in the opening races of the season, but they managed to find some competitiveness going into the race at Imola, but they were then disqualified after the race for having illegal cars. BAR had both cars below the minimum weight, which was then 605 kilos. BAR claimed that their Honda engine needed 6 kilos of fuel on board to work, and this fuel was hidden away in a second fuel tank that BAR claimed was for turning the engine over. It's just that this second fuel tank conveniently put them over the 605 kilo minimum weight limit. Mosley wanted the team kicked out of the whole season like they'd done with Tyrrell in 1984, but instead they just got a ban for 2 races. When they came back, they initially struggled to find some form. They were 10th and 12th at the Nürburgring, and both cars didn't finish in Canada. But after the United States Grand Prix that none of the Michelin teams started, Button went on a run of scoring at every race thereafter, and also got 2 podiums, which made his Driver of the Year 2004 tag not just a fluke or a flash in the pan. Sato, meanwhile, only scored 1 point in Hungary and would be let go at the end of the season to be replaced by Rubens Barrichello. At the end of the 2005 season, Honda bought the remaining 55% of the team, and they would be the Honda Formula 1 team from 2006 until the end of 2008. So it's just BAR's luck then that in the first year after selling the team, Jenson would win his first race at the Hungarian Grand Prix. And then 3 years later, the team that was once BAR would be world champions in the most unlikely way possible. That team's lineage is now the Mercedes team, which went on to batter Ferrari's Constructors' Championship streak by scoring 8 in a row, beating Ferrari's 6 in a row. But the BAR team, from the results and everything else, looked like a team that should have done much better. They had the money, they had some good drivers, but aside from a flash-in-the-pan season in 2004, they were stuck in mid-table mediocrity. Aside from the 2004 season, they were never higher than 5th in the Constructors, and they seemed to be full of ambition, but never achieved it. It's fine if you win a race in your 2nd, 3rd, 4th year of competition, but their best result was 2nd at the 2004 San Marino Grand Prix. Much like Toyota, they had a decent budget and factory support, but never hit the big time. So BAT had bought this historic team, but didn't really make any history of their own, which seems quite weird because you have Matra and Tyrrell, although you might want to consider those the same team because of just the way things worked back then. And then you've got Honda after BAR, and then Braun, which obviously did what it did in 2009, and now Mercedes, which has done quite a lot. But BAR in the middle seems to be the only one that didn't really stand out. Yeah, every other one of those teams did something pretty cool. Okay, Honda won 1 Grand Prix, but it's 1 more than BAR won. So it just seems that every single team in that lineage made some history, except for 1. But I'd like to know what you think down in the comments. So then, a look at the BAR years between 1999 and 2005. If this has been an interesting look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know a good job was done. And for more deep dives through days gone by, all the current affairs stuff, then subscribe and get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else to do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level. And if you want to contribute to the picture purchasing piggy bank or otherwise keep the lights on, there will be a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. There's also super thanks if you want to top up my coffee cup or memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.